Summer, 1982, the day the factory went silent forever. The heat that August morning felt different, not just the temperature, though by 6 a.m. it was already pushing 80 degrees, but the weight of it. The way it hung in the air between the machines, thick and unmoving, like the factory itself was holding its breath. Frank Miller clocked in at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes early, same as he'd done for 23 years. The time clock made its familiar chunk-click sound, metal stamp on paper card. His card, worn at the edges, coffee-stained at the corner where his thumb always gripped it, slid back into its slot. Row 3, position 12, right between Davidson and Kowalski. The same 3 cards, same 3 slots since 1959. Nobody said much that morning. The usual jokes about the Tigers game, about whose wife packed the worst sandwich, about the new guy who couldn't tell a torque wrench from a tire iron. All of it stayed unspoken. The locker room had the sound of a church, metal doors opening and closing, work boots on concrete, breath. Frank opened locker 47. The number had worn off years ago, but he knew it by the dent at the top left corner, same dent since '64 when Tommy Breslin had slammed it too hard after getting written up. Tommy was gone now, heart attack 3 years back, but the dent remained. Inside, his thermos, dented and scratched, paint mostly gone, his extra gloves, still in the wrapper from 1977. A photograph taped to the inside of the door, his wife, Margaret, his daughter Susan, his son Michael. Taken at Cedar Point, summer of '73. Everyone smiling, sun bright, no one knowing that 9 years later, this morning would come. The photograph would come down today, everything would, but Frank didn't think about that yet. Couldn't, not if he was going to get through the shift. He walked to his station at 6:03 a.m., machine 47. He'd never noticed before that his locker and his machine shared the same number, or maybe he had, and it had stopped meaning anything years ago. The machine sat quiet, waiting. In 3 minutes at 6:06 sharp, the morning whistle would blow. The machines would wake up. The factory would roar to life the way it had every weekday morning since 1947. Except today was the last time. Frank's hands found their positions without thought, left hand on the feed lever, right hand ready for the catch. His body knew this machine better than it knew anything else, better than the steering wheel of his Impala, better than the shape of his wife's shoulders when he held her, better than the contours of his own face in the mirror. 23 years, 243,600 parts, give or take. He'd counted once in '76 during a slow week, done the math on a napkin during lunch. Tommy had laughed at him. "What are you going to do with that number, Frank? Put it on your tombstone?" Frank had folded the napkin and put it in his wallet. It was probably still there. The whistle blew. 6:06 a.m. the machine started. And for the next 8 hours and 54 minutes, the factory was what it had always been. Noise and heat and metal and motion, men doing what they'd always done, making what they'd always made. The rhythm of it, the chunk-chunk hiss of machine 47, the deeper thud-thud of the press 3 stations down, the high whine of the saws in the back, all of it wove together into a sound that wasn't quite music but wasn't quite chaos either. It was work, the sound of work. At 10:07 a.m. the brake whistle blew. Never at 10 miles, not since '65. Nobody under 40 knew why anymore. But the old-timers knew, Frank knew. Some things you don't forget even when you stop talking about them. Frank poured coffee from his thermos, still hot. Margaret had filled it at 5:15 that morning, same as always. Black, no sugar. The metal cup that doubled as the thermos lid warmed his hands, even though the factory was already approaching 90 degrees. Ray Davidson sat down next to him, didn't say anything at first, just opened his lunchbox, metal, dented, probably older than Frank's, and pulled out a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. "Last break," Ray said finally. Not a question, a statement. Frank nodded. 27 years for me, Ray said. Started in '55, right out of high school. Thought I'd work here maybe 2-3 years, save up, do something else. He took a bite of his sandwich, chewed slowly. Guess I forgot to leave. Eddie Kowalski joined them. Then Pete Morrison. Then Tommy Breslin's nephew, Young Tommy, who everyone still called Young Tommy, even though he was 38 and his uncle had been dead 3 years. They sat in a circle, same circle they'd sat in for years, on crates and overturned buckets that had been in the same position so long they'd worn smooth spots into the concrete floor beneath them. Nobody said much. There wasn't much to say. They'd known this was coming since March, when the announcement went up on the bulletin board by the time clocks. Facility closure effective August 13, 1982. All personnel will receive severance and benefits information in the coming weeks. Severance, benefits, words that meant the end of things. The brake whistle blew again. Back to work, 7 hours to go. At noon, Frank opened his lunchbox. The sandwich was there, wrapped in wax paper the way Margaret had wrapped it for 23 years. Bologna and mustard, white bread, nothing fancy, but made with care. The wax paper folded just so, tight corners, no gaps where the mustard could leak through. But there was something else. A note. Small piece of paper, torn from the grocery list pad they kept by the phone. "I'm proud of you." 4 words, Margaret's handwriting. The same handwriting that had been on Christmas cards and birthday cards and notes in his lunchbox before, though those were always just practical things. "Don't forget milk," or "Susan has practice at 4," or "Love you." Never this, never "I'm proud of you." Frank read it twice, then folded it carefully and put it in his wallet next to the napkin from 76 with the number on it. He ate his sandwich slowly, tasted every bite, tried to remember if bologna and mustard had always tasted like this or if today was different, decided it didn't matter. Lunch ended. Back to Machine 47. The afternoon stretched long. Heat built up to the kind that made breathing feel like work. Sweat ran down backs and faces, salt-stained shirts. The factory had no air conditioning, never had, and on days like this you just endured. Drank water, took salt tablets, kept moving. Frank worked, hands on the machine, feed, catch, the rhythm automatic, mind somewhere else. He thought about 1959, his first day, how big the factory had seemed, how loud, how he'd been afraid he couldn't do it, couldn't keep up, couldn't learn. Ray Davidson had trained him, shown him how to stand, how to grip, how to read the machine's moods. "She'll tell you when something's wrong," Ray had said. "You just gotta listen." Frank had learned to listen. He thought about 1964, the summer it got so hot 2 men passed out on the floor, how they'd all taken turns rotating to the water station every 15 minutes, how they'd made it through anyway. He thought about 1971, the year they'd threatened to strike, the year the union rep had stood on a table in the break room and shouted about dignity and fair wages, how they'd won, sort of. Got a raise, kept their benefits, kept working. He thought about 1976, Tommy Breslin's heart attack, how he'd just dropped at his station, Machine 52, right in the middle of the morning shift. How they'd all stopped working, every man in the factory, while the ambulance came. How the machines had gone quiet for 17 minutes. How when they'd started back up, nothing felt the same. He thought about all the men who'd walked this floor, some still here, some gone, some dead, some moved on to other jobs, other lives, but all of them part of this place, all of them woven into the sound and heat and metal of it. At 2 loud p.m., the foreman, Big Mike Patterson, who'd been foreman since '68, walked through the floor, stopped at each station, shook each man's hand, didn't say much, didn't need to. His face said it all. When he got to Frank, he gripped Frank's hand hard, held it for a moment longer than necessary. "Good work, Miller," Big Mike said, voice rough. 23 years of good work. Frank nodded, couldn't trust his voice to answer. Big Mike moved on, down the line, station by station, man by man. At 2:47 p.m., Frank looked at his watch, 13 minutes left. At 2:53 p.m., he ran the second-to-last part through Machine 47. The metal came out clean, smooth, perfect, same as the 243,600 parts before it. At 2:58 p.m., he ran the last part. Chunk, his, done. He turned off the machine. The motor wound down, the hum fading, the vibration in the floor beneath his feet going still, and then he just stood there, hands on the machine, metal still warm under his palms. At 3:00 p.m. exactly, the whistle blew, not the end-of-shift whistle, the long one, the one they only used for emergencies or drills. But today, it meant something else. It meant done. It meant over. It meant the end. The machine stopped. All of them, at once. And for the first time in 35 years, since 1947, since the day this factory had opened, the building went silent. Not quiet. Silent. 847 men standing at their stations and nobody moving, nobody speaking, just the silence pressing down, heavy and strange, like a sound you'd forgotten existed. Frank looked around, saw Ray Davidson with his hand still on his machine, saw Eddie Kowalski standing frozen mid-reach, saw young Tommy with his head down, shoulders shaking, saw big Mike Patterson in the foreman's office, looking out through the window at the floor, at all of them, his face carved from stone. The silence lasted maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute. Time felt broken, and then, slowly, men started moving, shutting things down, cleaning stations, gathering tools, the final rituals of the final day. Frank cleaned Machine 47 the way he always did, wiped down the surfaces, checked the oil levels even though it didn't matter anymore. Put his tools back in their places in the cabinet beside the station. Then he walked to his locker, opened it one last time. He took the photograph off the inside of the door. Margaret and Susan and Michael at Cedar Point, summer of '73. Slipped it into his shirt pocket, careful not to bend it. He took his thermos, left the gloves. He closed the locker. The metal door clicked shut. The sound echoed. In the parking lot, men stood by their cars, not quite ready to leave, talking in small groups, or not talking, just standing. Frank found his Impala, brown, '74 model, 127,000 miles, and got in. Put his thermos and his lunchbox on the passenger seat, sat there with the windows down, engine off. From here, he could see the building, red brick, dirty windows, loading docks. The sign above the main entrance, Midwest Manufacturing, established 1947. He wondered if they'd take the sign down, or leave it up, a marker for something that used to be. The sun was still high, the day still hot. Somewhere people were doing normal things, buying groceries, mowing lawns, picking kids up from swim practice. But here, in this parking lot, 847 men were leaving a place they'd never come back to, walking away from machines that would never run again, carrying lunchboxes that would sit in garages and basements, dented and scratched, holding no lunch, holding only memory. Frank started the Impala. The engine turned over, familiar and reliable. He pulled out of his spot, row 3, space 12, where he'd parked for 23 years, and drove toward the exit. At the gate, he stopped. Looked back one more time. The building sat quiet. Windows dark, doors closed, silent, and it would stay silent, forever. Frank drove home. Margaret was waiting on the front porch when he pulled into the driveway. She stood up as he got out of the car. Didn't say anything. Just walked to him and put her arms around him. He held her, felt her warmth, smelled her hair. Same shampoo for 27 years, floral, faint. "It's done," he said, voice rough. First words he'd spoken since lunch. She nodded against his shoulder, held him tighter. They stood there in the driveway, in the heat of the August afternoon, holding each other while the sun moved across the sky and the world kept turning, and somewhere, in a building that used to roar with life, machines sat silent in the dark.